we are live. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Endless Report. This is episode 29 for the week of October 14th. It is today. We are back with a good amount of news this week. Not as much as the last few really jam-packed news weeks here. We got a bit of interesting news this week to get through in the next hour or so. So, as always, I'm probably just going to hop into it and get right into the first news story here. So, bear with me as I pull up our docket for the week, and we're going to get started with the latest news here. So the first thing, first off here, nothing really too crazy new, but Steam Deck, something we've been talking about for a while now, actually, is finally fully available. So you can see a bit of a different headline here. We'll get into that in a second. But as you may have known, Steam Deck has been on reserve-only basis for the last year or so now, since early 2022. So now, officially, as of last week, you can now go online to Valve on Steam.com and order one directly. No wait times, no wait list, no reservations, anything like that. So that's good to hear. The Steam Deck is fully out and available now. But one other funny thing with that release was Steam Deck had launched a trailer, to go alongside the full release of the console with no reservations. And in that trailer, they actually did feature a Switch emulation platform. So I'm not sure if they have the original trailer here still on the article as it was taken down, but they did show a lot of games being played on the Steam Deck, and one of them including Yuzu, which YUZU there, as you can see, which is actually an emulation platform to play Nintendo Switch games. So not entirely on the up and up there with it when it comes to things you're allowed to do technically and legally on the Steam Deck. So Valve did take that video down, as a lot of people do like to emulate, games. Then again, you're not paying for those games. That's not something, Valve would be, publicly supporting for people to be doing. That being said, they did have that logo in the trailer. So it goes to show there are people, using Steam Deck, I'm sure are, partaking in those piracy. And I don't want to say piracy, but emulators, you are getting into, some legal areas there where it may not be something Steam themselves want to be promoting for you to do with your Steam Deck there. That's probably not one of the approved uses there in the Steam Deck. But that being said, they did showcase it in the trailer, and then subsequently, when people pointed this out, they indeed did take it down. That being said, it does go to show that there are currently a lot of emulation, techniques being done on the Switch, and Valve is aware of that, and it's very much something that the Steam Deck is being used for. So it's kind of something that's not really something they'd want to, advertise with their Steam Deck, but it is something that happens, and it is kind of funny to see that show up in the video here. And you can see this is the screen grab from Nibel on Twitter. Someone is always getting those screen grabs from a lot of popular trailers on Twitter here, but you can see that right there. But that's really the whole story there. Some people online thought that was kind of funny that Valve did directly addressed the platforms that are being used for emulation on the Steam Deck. But that's about it for that story there. Not much else to cover in terms of the Steam Deck being available, being out and ready to purchase, and also that trailer release there. So with that being said, I'm going to continue on here and move on to what's next with Xbox, as you may see on the docket. So I'm just going to transfer this over here. And in the meantime, I will switch up our little icon and we'll get to that Xbox story. All right. And I'm pulling that Xbox article up now. So this one's pretty interesting. This one is something that we've seen a few times in the past with other various things. And I'll explain what I mean as I pull this up. So this is Phil Spencer once again. Oftentimes Phil Spencer, the Xbox boss, will have video conferences or just things where he's live streaming or he's discussing in interviews, with podcasts and the like. And whenever he does a public appearance from his home office, there's a lot of Xbox memorabilia and things like that on his shelves behind him. So what Phil Spencer likes to do is many times in the past is kind of tease new Xbox announcements from what's on his shelf. There were a few stories a few years back with him having the Kojima production statue, which later on indicated they were partnering up with Kojima for other things. And that was kind of a debate whether or not he was indicating that they would have a partnership with Kojima or not from that. And that was confirmed later on, about a year or so later, that they were partnering with Xbox. So it is something to, look into and not get too in depth. This is someone's just shelf in their office. But that being said, people online go crazy after this every time Phil Spencer does a public appearance, because there's always different setups on the shelf and people always try to figure out what's the next tease for Xbox that he's hinting at. But this time, very, very direct, not even really a tease, I would say, but really just a call out of this device here. So I'm going to pull up the picture that we've seen. And this was for the Fallout 25th anniversary this week. So if you didn't know, we do talk about Bethesda a bit on the channel, and we actually have some Bethesda news later on, so we'll stick around for that. Let me pull that docket back up here, actually, so that we see that on the docket. Sorry about that. But Yeah, I this was Fallout's 25th anniversary this week. Kind of came with a little bit of bittersweet, I would say, reaction from the community that, being because Fallout, its last main title was Fallout 4 in 2015. That was followed up by Fallout 76 in 2018, which is not really considered to be a mainline title, the multiplayer version of Fallout, and many people, unfortunately, were very disappointed with that game and had a rocky launch. So we're at a point with Fallout here where it's almost 10 years after the last mainline game, and we're looking at maybe almost 10, 15 years more for the next mainline game, unless we see some sort of, wild card play here where Bethesda decides to, give the franchise to someone else, like we did see with Obsidian and Fallout New Vegas back in the day. But that being said, it was still a celebratory week for the franchise, even though there was not much news on the horizon. But during this announcement, we also got this picture. And again, I'm getting a little off track here. We'll get back to this picture here. Where Phil Spencer showed a few things on his desk, on his shelves here, promoting the releases of Fallout and some other Xbox-related achievements. You see that Kojima production statue there I mentioned earlier, still on the shelf. But up here, we see something a little interesting. It's some sort of Xbox device that no one was sure what this was. So I'm actually going to quickly pull up another tweet. This was from Nibel on Twitter again, who also gave us a nice zoom-in picture here to point this out. But as you can see, there's some sort of streaming device or stick or disc on the display here with an Xbox logo that is as of now not an Xbox product. It's not something anyone's ever seen before publicly. This is not an official Xbox dongle or device or anything like that anyone could really recognize. So something we've talked about actually on the Endless Report numerous times was the idea of this Xbox Game Pass streaming stick or some sort of device that would enable you to get Game Pass on rather a smart TV or any monitor or any kind of device rather than just an Xbox device or the mobile app. So we see here that there is something going on the shelf, and then Xbox later confirmed, because of all this internet, speculation around these Twitter threads and all, that this is a confirmed prototype for that device. So we don't know much else about that, whether that makes it official, whether this is a tease of the device still to come, whether this device will still be released in full. That being said, Xbox did have to come out and confirm this is a prototype for their Xbox streaming stick. So exactly what that entails, again, we're not sure. But as we have kind of speculated on in the past, and what I think is a safe assumption is that this will be a device that would enable you to get Xbox Game Pass via their cloud game streaming network. I don't think you'd be able to run any games natively on something like this, just like you can on your mobile device. But that being said, this would be a pathway for Xbox Game Pass to get into a TV, maybe a non-smart TV that didn't have an app that will be put into smart TV software as well. I think Xbox's goal here is to get Game Pass and that cloud streaming specifically on every platform they possibly can, whether you're streaming it from your console or not even getting in with the console, like I said, and streaming it from your phone, a computer device, a TV, what have you. So if they can get that app on smart TVs, this dongle stick wherever for other devices wherever you need it, their app on everything else. I mean, I think there was a story this week later subsequently confirming that the reports that we had talked about earlier, how Xbox wanted to get Game Pass on PlayStation and Nintendo Switch, even to get that platform on every single device they possibly could. Of course, the reports, they confirm Sony and Nintendo weren't really biting at that. It seems they don't really want a competing subscription service in the middle of their whole own ecosystem, and that's clear with what PlayStation and even Nintendo, I should say, has done with their kind of classics libraries and some of their streaming options. But that being said, this does kind of confirm this is still ongoing. This is something Xbox has clearly tested in prototype to the point that Phil Spencer would have a copy, a full hardware version of this device. So we'll have to see what happens next with streaming and the cloud gaming networks. Again, it's something we talk about every time I bring up cloud gaming, but I don't think it's really at the point where I could fully commit. As someone who plays games a lot, or at least wants to play games a lot when I'm not busy, could totally adapt to, just because the streaming services right now, even with a great internet connection, are still very choppy at some points. You still feel that bandwidth, low bandwidth and some latency issues there. And I don't want to say that's always the case. There are some times when I've tried streaming and it wasn't terrible. It ran well enough where I could have a playable experience. So I don't want to say it's not there at all, but it certainly isn't to the level I think, at least personally, that could be really, where I would drop, installable games or drop, natively playing my games from a hard drive. I think that's something that I would definitely very much lean towards, unless I had, some sort of special case where I wanted to use streaming. There are things where you could stream from your PC or from your PlayStation and get certain games that you wouldn't. I'm looking into things with the Steam Deck. I'm trying to get my PlayStation maybe to my Steam Deck and see if that would be cool with that cloud gaming service there as well. So there's totally things you could do when it comes to cloud game streaming that would be outside the box and you wouldn't really be able to do without cloud streaming. And I think it's really cool. But until those speeds can get to the point where they're super consistent and there's really no lag or anything noticeable difference between that and a natively installed game, then I'll probably reconsider. But as of now, I feel there is a bit of a discrepancy there. That being said, I do want to continue on here. We are going to get to our next story, which is, I believe, with Meta and VR. So bear with me here. I'm just going to pull the docket down for a moment as I pull up that article. But we have a few articles actually, about 2-3 things I'm going to pull up here for this story, actually, because we had a few announcements from Meta this week. Not only Meta, actually, but I did want to put this after the Xbox story because we did get some announcements in line with Microsoft. So I'm going to pull this up right here. And here we go. So as you can see, Meta officially announces a new Quest Pro VR headset. And before I get too ahead of myself with this one, the Quest Pro, I should mention this is not even a gaming device. So I'm not going to get too in-depth into this, but because of that fact that we're going to stick to the more gaming side of things here, but I do think this is important to cover, is that this is a fully productivity oriented device, as Meta calls it. So I'm not sure what exactly they have in mind here, but as you can see, Meta tweets here, the quote, "The VR revolution is underway. We've designed an all-new headset packed with advanced tech and geared for productivity, creative work, and collaboration. This is the Meta Quest Pro, available on October 25th, pre-order today." So as you can see here, and apologies there, I did kind of pull up that link a little bit. But yeah, it's good we could see this trailer as well. I do want to discuss this anyway. We do see a bit of an interesting move here with Meta. Not that this was anything unexpected. They've been talking a lot about how they wanted VR to not be just like a gaming platform, more so a productivity platform. We've seen what Mark Zuckerberg has done with his meetings in the Meta company of wanting everything to be in virtual reality and in the metaverse. People have been quick to, I would say, poke fun at the metaverse, at least in terms of Facebook's version of the metaverse, I should say, because I don't think the metaverse itself is anything to poke fun with. I think it's very much as we hear a lot of buzzwords these days, there are very much a lot of ideas here going into Web3 and then the metaverse that I do believe are very much part of the future. And I think VR is not going anywhere. I very much think that maybe not in the form we see it now, but as it continues to evolve, we'll see many more forms of virtual reality as we continue to consolidate and to make these smaller devices more accessible in different ways. I really don't think we're going to see AR and VR slow down anytime soon. At least that's just my opinion. But that being said, I do think that this is an interesting move here. As I was saying before, I think people have been maligning a bit Facebook's version because it hasn't really looked as what we've expected the metaverse to be. And we've seen many screenshots of what their virtual worlds, have they been planning have looked like. And people are quick to make jokes about games like Second Life and games that have been out for 10, 20 years even that were virtual worlds that may have looked even, more appealing to some people than what they're seeing now. So I think that's no gripes on the idea of the metaverse itself or the future of the internet or anything like that. I think that, the blockchain and Web3, that's all very much its own conversation. But I do think that what Meta's doing in terms of how they're building their own world and their own piece of this and the marketing around that, I think maybe could, use some of that reinvigoration there. And then exactly what that is, I'm not sure. I think this idea is very out of the box to a lot of people, especially the general public. I think there's certain commercials you see, especially for Meta and for other things that really, we do feel like we're stepping into the future and almost in a sci-fi way. And I don't mean to sound so hyperbolic, but it's crazy how much we see now that it really looks like it's something out of Star Trek or something in the past, that we really wouldn't expect to be so rapidly progressing towards, but we very much are in some accounts when it comes to this virtual reality technology. So I think the way we frame it socially and economically, and the way this becomes part of our working or life or entertainment life, however you want to see this here, is still a very ongoing question. I wouldn't even say debate. It's very much something that's actively developing. And while I can probably talk about that all day in terms of what I actually think about it and everything there, again, I'm talking very broadly here. I do think it's very interesting. Of course, I'm curious to see how this evolves and how this progresses for Meta and for other companies. I said a lot. I'm very interested in the PlayStation VR side of things this fall, what they're doing with their headset. And gaming is where I really get excited about virtual reality, just because I'm all about, new ways to experience things and broadening, the idea of the medium, not just, in terms of art direction or narrative or anything like that, but in terms of the medium itself of video games and how we experience our games, not just what we're experiencing. So it's, again, I know I'm talking very grandiose here, but it's exciting. It's interesting. I think people are very skeptical for some good reasons and some not good reasons, I would say, depending on what your reasons are. But I do think it's something to look out for, to be skeptical of in a cautiously optimistic way. I would say it's definitely, if you're not very very into tech and VR, I wouldn't say you should be going out and getting the highest end VR headset immediately if that's not your jam necessarily. That being said, if you're into the cutting edge, if you're interested in VR, I think we're really on a cutting edge moment here in terms of the progression of headsets. I think with this new Quest headset, what's going on with the Meta Quest 2, but really I think the PlayStation VR is very exciting, and whatever comes next out of the PC space that has similar specs to that PlayStation VR 2 is really going to be interesting as well, because I think we're really getting to a moment with things like that foveated rendering and the eye tracking and some of the motion detections and hand controls and things like that. I think the more we see with all this, the more interesting all this gets. And I think it's the next question is, where are the games? What is the software? What is going to be made to interact with these systems? That'll be the interesting question. But yeah, that's really it for just the announcement of the headset. It's kind of my 2 cents on VR and the state of VR in general right now. But there were some more announcements surrounding this that I did want to mention. So I'm gonna pull this article here where, speaking of PlayStation VR, I don't think Meta is in any way unaware of what's going on over at Sony, and in fact, maybe even taking some ideas out of their playbook here a bit. So as we see at the top, Meta has acquired actually some new VR development studios for games. So as we can see, these aren't new studios. I shouldn't say it like that, because these are studios that have worked with PlayStation VR in the past on multiple occasions here. So as I see, I'm going to jump into this article. We can see Iron Man VR, a game that was an exclusive to PSVR up until, I want to say, even till today, is still exclusive to PSVR, is now going to be coming to Meta Quest 2 on November 3rd, I believe. Yep, November 3rd. And following this announcement, Meta did confirm they also acquired this 3 studios, I should, as we see in the article here, but including the Iron Man VR studio, Camouflage. This included Armature Studio as well, who are the makers of the Resident Evil 4 VR series. I should say series. The Resident for excuse me, I'm having a brain fart there. Resident Evil 4 VR game, just that game. And also, these members included Retro Studio staffers, who are the makers of the Metro Prime series. They included in this article. But finally, Wilson's Heart creator and VR beat 'em up Path of the Warrior developer Twisted Pixel. So all 3 of these developers have joined Meta Studios and are now going to be making VR games for them. So I find this pretty interesting, because obviously Meta is not ignoring what's going on in the gaming space, of course, with VR, even though they're very much adamant about their productivity focus here, especially with the Quest, the Quest Pro, where they're saying it's really not even made for gaming whatsoever. It's just for productivity and how they see VR working into the future of our society and the way we work throughout our daily lives. It's more of like that kind of a general tech product rather than a VR video game entertainment product like the Meta Quest Pro, not the Pro, sorry, the Meta Quest 2 and the other portable headsets they are still playing around with, still have a gaming focus there. That being said, they're not, like I said, they're not ignoring what PlayStation's doing here. They've gobbled up 3 of PlayStation's partner studios. I don't think PlayStation had any ownership over these. I believe these were third-party VR studios. That being said, they were making exclusive VR games for PlayStation. Meta took note of that, and now they are under the Meta banner and we're making games on that end. So pretty interesting move there. Again, we see a lot of acquisitions these days. This is a fairly small one, I would say, in the grand scheme of things, of all we talk about every week here, but still very interesting. Still goes to show that the VR competition here is very alive and well, and we may see more, especially later this year and early next year, in terms of what's going on with VR. And the big question for me is, again, the games. Where what else is coming to PSVR and the Quest? What else is happening there? We've seen a bit, but I think we need a little bit more before I can commit to really spending a good amount of money on a new VR headset. That being said, I'm not, like I said before, I'm not someone who thinks VR is a fad or is dying out. Or if anything, I think we're just waiting for the technology to really get to a point where we could see this progression kind of exponentially grow. And I think we're getting there. So it's pretty exciting. That being said, there was something else I did want to cover from all this Meta announcements. We did get, I will just say this briefly, because speaking on PlayStation here, we did get another announcement that Xbox Game Pass itself, speaking of that Steam streaming stick, and then wanted to be on every platform possible, they also want to be in VR. So while they don't have VR, games across Game Pass, I shouldn't say outright, but they don't have a full VR platform there. All of your regular 2D, play on a screen games can be played in a virtual screen in VR, and Meta has announced that they are including the Xbox Game Pass app within their Meta ecosystem. So when you put on your headset, you can kind of go over to your virtual TV and turn on your Xbox and play within your headset if that's something you want to do. So again, that's another version just of Microsoft partnering up here with Meta, getting some things working there, compatible with their platform, as well as kind of furthering that mission of getting Xbox Game Pass on any platform they possibly can. That being said, the last part of this I thought was pretty interesting was another game announcement. So we had a few game announcements here. One I thought I'd just particularly point out because I did get some attention online was Among Us VR. So I'm pulling this up here, and I'll mute that just so all the audio I'm getting in my eardrums here. I can hear myself talking, but there we go. And as you can see, of course, if you were familiar with the game Among Us, it was kind of I would guess you call kind of a cult hit. One of those games that was a very small, indie development team. I want to say it was 3 or 4 people that worked on Among Us, and it became, an international sensation. People across the world that were playing Among Us in droves, in the millions, and I think still to this day play Among Us very regularly. And you've seen many spin-off games come out of Among Us. You've seen I don't want to. I may have to look this game up as I say this because I'm not sure if this is a spin-off directly of Among Us, but there's a game First Class Trouble that got a lot of attention. It's on PC and PlayStation, I believe, and I believe that was a direct shoot off of Among Us here. But I'm actually looking that game up because I want to confirm. Yeah, that came out in 2021, so that was a spin-off. Of course, Fortnite's version of Among Us. They basically took the Among Us mode and built it in Fortnite, and not something that Fortnite is shy of doing, as the whole game was built off of a battle royale that was really originally taken from PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. So pretty interesting there, but again, that's just kind of background for those of you who don't know Among Us. That being said, as you can see from the trailer here, we now have a first person VR version of the game. It's launching for Meta Quest here, as you can see, and I believe this is coming out next month. I may be mistaken here. November 10th, so around a month from now, a little less than a month actually, and we're getting Among Us VR. But pretty interesting there. We do want to move on actually because I have more to cover here, and we're about halfway through the hour. So again, I'm going to keep it rolling as usual. But we are going to get into some on Starfield. So a little bit more on the Bethesda game that now that I think about it, would have been coming out next month as well, very very soon on November 11th, around when that game's coming out. So unfortunately, it was delayed earlier this summer, and it's coming out early 2023. We still don't have a release date here. But as I pull up Starfield, we get to get more information this week in terms of the game's dialogue system specifically, and a few frequently answered questions that they were getting. So earlier this week, Todd Howard, the game director at Bethesda Game Studios, and the community director there, put out a video basically just interviewing Todd Howard on all the most frequently asked questions of Starfield. That being said, it was a pretty decently long video. Actually, I want to say it was about 4 or 5 minutes. But that being said, it was basically 1 or 2 questions because there were a few things that were very up in the air about, I want to say, the game's dialogue system, progression system. People had mentioned the amount of dialogue lines in this game was very, very large, and they kind of get more in depth about exactly what's going on there and how that works. So actually, one moment, I'm just going to move our marker down here so we get that lined up right with the story. There we are. So getting into that, as you can see on the subtitle, Todd Howard says the game just passed over 250,000 lines of dialogue. So to put that in perspective here, and I'm not sure if they have the graph on this article, but I do remember the numbers, so we can get into it. Yeah, they don't. But I believe here around Fallout 3 had about 60,000 lines of dialogue, and they said our Skyrim rather had around 60,000 lines of dialogue. To put it in perspective, and Skyrim has a lot of dialogue, a lot of characters, a lot of quest lines. Fallout 4, they said, had around 100,000 lines of dialogue, which is still a very, very large number. When Fallout 4 came out, that was a big deal. How much they said more compared to Skyrim. That being said, when that game came out, there were some concerns in the dialogue system because it wasn't the traditional Bethesda system of multiple full text options, but it was rather kind of up, down on the D-pad and positive or negative and a little bit more simplified. So people weren't a lot of people weren't the biggest fans of Fallout 4's dialogue system. I do want to note that. That being said, like I said earlier, Starfield now has 250,000 lines of dialogue. So again, that was 50,000 for Skyrim, 100,000 for Fallout 4, and now 250,000 lines of dialogue for Starfield. So to put that in perspective, it's literally 5 times the amount of dialogue in Skyrim, one of the biggest RPGs ever, of course. And when people put out big numbers for RPGs, a lot of people get concerned, and for good reason. You hear a game where they say the map is this many kilometers wide, or there's, this many quest lines and this many characters, it could almost be a concern because you think, well, I do want quality over quantity here, and how much of that is going to be, just content for content's sake, and the game being big just for the sake of it being a big game, versus how much is their unique, interesting, content that really, pushes the game forward. And I think, not to call out any games out here, but I think, to give an example, I think certain, recent Ubisoft games, most notably kind of like the most recent Assassin's Creed games that are like 60, 100, 120 hours of content that really just keep going on. I think people are more inclined to play a game that's maybe, 80, 60, 40, on the lower, end of those hours going down, but has a lot more richer, interesting narrative and content that doesn't really get stale. I think people would rather do new and exciting things, back to back for many hours, rather than do even more hours, but a lot of things that kind of get repetitive and, get into the same rhythm of things. So, obviously, quality, I don't have to really explain quality over quantity. I think you understand. But I think this one, the reason I bring it up is because this one here is not just of, oh, here's a big number of content, so that concerns me, but rather it's dialogue. So when you think about that and you look at these dialogue trees here, these are, traditional Bethesda or old school RPGs where you get multiple, full sentence options, and you also get skill checks, where I'm not sure if they have another screenshot here, where you have persuasion and it says, your persuasion level is at 1, 2, 3, 4. If you want to try this risky thing to say, there are many different options for dialogue. So I do think this is all together a positive, because despite it being a quantity thing here, dialogue is inherently quality to me when it comes to narrative and story choices, and character choice here, because I think the more dialogue, the better. That just means more voice options, more trees here on these conversations. So where if I say one thing, there are whole other trees of dialogue where it could go that I may never even hear. I think the more dialogue, the better, because that just means there's more, interesting and unique scenarios that could happen depending on what you choose. So I don't think it's one of those things where you just hear more, a larger number and you think, I hope they're not, just padding it with more content, because all dialogue can be, to me, as someone who's looking for an RPG, I guess choice affected experience in these types of games that, react to the way I interact with the world. I think more dialogue can only be a good thing, because that only means more depth and more character and more, player choice and unpredictability to all of these characters and all of these systems. And that's something that promotes, more and more playthroughs of the game, more and more explorations of different things that you may have not done the same way the first time. So that's what I'm looking for in a Bethesda RPG. I think everything that's gone on with them in the past few years, everybody's, I think, fairly, concerned to some extent with their past few launches. But I do think that everything they've been showing here, and especially in terms of how they've been talking about going back to the original way of them doing things, especially with the dialogue system, I think is crucial to getting back to what their, I use this phrase a lot, but what their bread and butter is and why people love these games so much to begin with. And I think if they hit that home, and if they can really hit that, as well as hitting the environmental storytelling, which they're also really known for, and not letting the quantity, like we're talking about, of those planets, because we heard there's about 1,000 planets in Starfield. So I think if they can continue to let quality shine through, and them having these curated, interesting, unique experiences on certain places, I think this could be a really, really, really exciting game. It's something I've, of course, been excited about in the past, but again, I'm cautiously optimistic in certain ways. I'm concerned in some ways that other people are as well in terms of the launch, and we'll see how that goes. But we'll have to wait and see. And hearing something like 250,000 lines of dialogue is very exciting, I think, for any RPG fan who is interested in that kind of gameplay and those kind of dialogue trees. So again, we'll have to wait and see. I could probably talk on that a lot longer, but I think that's about it for Starfield today. Again, there was not much else discussed there. That video was mostly discussing the dialogue system and a few of people's concerns with, how they looked at Starfield in certain ways. The other thing to discuss, I will mention, is they talked about kind of the tone and the vibe of the game they're going for. One of the questions they asked Todd Howard was, is this a hard sci-fi game? Meaning, is this is this more fantastical along the lines of fantasy? I think almost like Destiny, kind of like sci-fi fantasy. Is this hard dystopian sci-fi? And I think one of the things he said was, I don't think this could ever be any, hard sci-fi, depending on what you mean by that, because, it's not like you're, dying out in the cold depths of space, or you're finding some, dark truth to the universe. He said it's more so it's a video game, it's something you want to have fun with and enjoying. And it's not, it's not like a short sci-fi story where you make it a more, dire circumstance, if you will. I think it's more so something that people are looking to get entertainment and the sense of awe, and kind of mystery and intrigue and curiosity into the universe. I think it's more so those are more kind of fantasy elements, I would say. But then again, I think they're looking at more technical and more like kind of like gritty. I think aesthetic, I would say, with the spaceships and kind of with the fuel. They talked a bit about how the fuel lines in the spaceships, they thought about having you run out of fuel completely, but they realized running out of fuel in the middle of space can get really boring and it would just kind of stop the game in its tracks. And when that was kind of hard sci-fi and like realism and having you to deal with that, they realized they probably shouldn't have just a raw fuel source that could run out, but rather it's something that kind of drains and I believe recharges and kind of limits your ability to go at certain speeds when you do run out. So I think they find a workaround for that. And I think his answer even was, well, with mods and with other updates, maybe we could work around that. So that's one of those things where Bethesda says, well, our modding community will make a change for pretty much every basic feature anyway. So we might as well make the decision that we think is best, for our systems. And then they can change it back to the one that's more realistic or more, immersive or whatever, what have you, if they want to. So, okay, maybe not the best logic from, coming from, I think options, more options from the get-go is always a good thing, but with something essential like that, and with a modding community like Bethesda's, it's a very unique scenario where I feel like not many other developers could say that and kind of get away with saying something like that. But I think knowing the modding community for Bethesda and for Skyrim and Fallout in general, it does make sense why they would kind of have the thought process of, that's a quick mod fix. If people do want to change that, they're really not that happy. So kind of funny there. I thought that was interesting, but I think we're gonna move on here. That's about it from that interview and from all that dialogue tree stuff. So if you bear with me here, we're gonna move on to our next story here. One moment, and we will pull up. We actually have a trailer here coming up here, so I'm gonna move us down to that trailer. And actually, I'm just gonna take 1 second here to get that up, and I will be back in a moment. So I'm just gonna put up that "Be Right Back" screen, and we'll get into that next story. So bear with me. All right. So apologies for the quick break there, but we are back, and I'm going to pull up. As I said, there was a trailer we were about to pull up here, and that is none other than the Super Mario Brothers movie trailer. So let me pull that up, and we're going to get into that real quickly. So again, I'm not going to have much to say on this other than just excited for the movie. It's a fun one. This is a cool cartoon movie coming from obviously one of the most popular video game characters of all time, if not the most. I would dare say. I mean, you could probably say Pac-Man or something. Or I'm trying to think what would be really top Mario in terms of the really top video game characters of all time. There's a few for sure. There's a top 10 list, but we're not gonna get into that for now. But of course, Mario, is kind of a very much a face of video games, and it's cool to see a very a fun, cool movie out of coming out of this. Of course, there was a lot of jokes and a lot of rumors online about the voice casting. A lot of people were not happy that Charles Martinet, the traditional voice of Mario, is not voicing the character in this iteration. And there's a lot of debate around that, around people, if people wanted to hear that voice for a whole movie and things like that. I think Mario's voice is great. I mean, I don't know. I tend to very much enjoy Mario's voice. It is kind of an over the top kind of Brooklyn Italian. I'm I'm Italian. I don't think it's too goofy or anything. I find it very funny and very endearing. But I do understand why people wouldn't want to hear the wahoo type of voice for an hour straight. I do understand that. That being said, I do think Charles Martinet is an awesome voice actor. I was just talking about Skyrim around Bethesda games as well. He's the voice of Parthenax, the dragon in Skyrim, who is a very deep, very ethereal, almost like I want to say like Max von Sydow type of voice. I think of like Game of Thrones, like the very like ancient type character. So I don't think he doesn't have that range per se. But then again, we have Chris Pratt playing Mario in this film, and as we can see here, Mario showing up now. We actually do have Jack Black in the role of Bowser there. I did want to mention that as well. I think Jack Black is going to hit that out of the park. It seemed really it seemed like a good. I mean, obviously, it's just one or two dialogue lines here. We're not getting anything too in depth, but it seems like it sounds pretty good. It sounds like it's gonna be a fun movie. And we hear Chris Pratt's voice as well, and I would recommend if you haven't seen this trailer and you want to hear their voices, I will have the link in the description later on, once this gets uploaded after the live stream. That being said, I would recommend if you just go with Super Mario Bros. Trailer right now, if you're watching live, and go watch that. I would recommend if you're all interested, because it does seem really fun and really cool there. But that being said, I don't think Chris Pratt's Mario voice is anything to worry about or anything. I think there's a lot of debate about that online. Speaking of that, we have Charlie Day here playing Luigi. I'm a fan of Charlie Day's voice. I think he has kind of a fun, goofy, good voice for like voice acting as well. So that'll be interesting. That being said, let me get these advertisements off the screen here. But yeah, I think that's a fun one. Again, not much else to talk about on the Mario trailer. I just wanted to play that quickly because that was one of the bigger, video game news stories this week. Everybody's been talking about it. So I thought I'd briefly play that, but I think it's something that would be better suited for you to go watch on your own with audio if you're excited. But that movie comes out next year. I'm not sure we do have a release date yet. I don't think we do, but we will see more about that in 2023. And I'm sure we'll get a more in-depth trailer with the voice characters and a little more going on there. But we did see a really, star-studded voice casting there, I should say. So we have a lot going on in that movie, but I think it's gonna be fun for the whole family, whether it's for kids or for people who are playing Mario, for the last 20, 30 years. I think, whoever's watched that movie, it's gonna be a good time. So I'm probably gonna see it at some point. I've played. I should say I'm not the biggest, Mario diehard Mario fan. I haven't played every single Mario game, but I played most of the main series when it comes to Super Mario Bros. Mario Galaxy, Mario Odyssey. I'm missing somewhere, the Nintendo 64 era. I wasn't playing many Mario games then, but I did get, a good amount of the Mario classic games under my belt. But I will be excited to see that as well. I still actually haven't seen the Sonic movies, and I know people like those as well. When it comes to kind of cartoony video game movies, I have not seen any of the Pokemon, Pikachu, Detective Pikachu stuff either. As well, but I know people, some of these movies have been really well received, and I think this is going to be another one. I think this doesn't seem like anything that's something to be worried about. I think every new video game announcement movie these days, we talk about this a lot, gets kind of, people worry is it's going to be, faithful, adaptation to the game, for which makes sense when people are very passionate about, the games that they love. But I think people tend to get over worried about certain things when it comes to that. And I think that this looks really fun, really cool. So I'm not too worried about all the voice actor drama stuff. I do think, I think Mario's voice actor, Charles Martinet, may get a cameo or maybe another character even. I hope that's the case because it's such an iconic voice. And I do think that should be included. I do agree with that. But I wouldn't say that, I would put anything down on the rest of the movie because of that. I think it's, as I said, I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be cool. So that being said, I'm going to move on to our next story here. Another movie, actually. We have some more movie news, was very directly video game related in a more direct kind of meta way, if you will. So I'm going to bring this up as well. So this one is called Dumb Money, this movie, interesting enough. So I'm going to pull this up. This was something that Sony Pictures, not PlayStation to be confused with, but Sony Pictures has purchased. This is a working script that is now being developed by Sony Pictures. And Seth Rogen and Paul Dano star. If you don't know Paul Dano, I hope I'm saying that right. I believe he was the Riddler in the newest Batman movie. That's where I know him from, at least. That's where I recognize that name. So him and Seth Rogen, of course, a little bit more of a recognizable name there, are going to be starring in this movie based on the whole GameStop stock market saga of the last year or so, I should say. So not to get too into what happened there with GameStop, because I think that's more of an in-depth discussion. And I would encourage, if you haven't seen, to kind of look up what had been going on there. But basically, the GameStop stock was in a rough state. GameStop as a company was not doing well. And the stock, because of just community push and kind of people in the, online and in the industry really communicating their want to push the GameStop stock, surged the stock price and actually gave GameStop a big of a boom. So again, I'm not going to get too into that because I'm not an expert on the whole situation. I wasn't following it too closely. So I don't want to say something that may be out of the realm of the truth of the situation or mistaking anything there. But that being said, I do want to read more on this movie here. So the movie is starring Seth Rogen and Paul Dano, as well as Sebastian Stan, from Marvel, as well as Pete Davidson and Shailene Woodley, two very notable actors as well. Apparently more casting choices are going to be revealed soon. So this is a star-studded cast. This is going to be probably a pretty high-profile movie. And the description here is Dumb Money is a classic David versus Goliath tale about how Wall Street was beaten at its own game. So that's the description. It's a Sony Pictures Motion Group President Josh Greenstein. It's a story of our time, and the story is timeless. We are excited to be working with Craig, who is a world-class filmmaker. And I'm not sure if they mentioned here who is the filmmaker in this article, actually, which is, I'm not sure they actually say who they're referencing here. That being said, yeah, we do get just the cast, but Craig Gillespie. Here we go. He is the one who produced the Social Network. So if you do know that film, you know that this what's planned here. Obviously, we have Seth Rogen starring. He worked with Jesse Eisenberg on the Social Network in the past when those stars. I do think this is a very interesting concoction here, a very interesting recipe for when it comes to idea, director, cast. This could be a very interesting kind of thriller-esque movie that I think could be up for some, maybe nominations. It does sound like one of those. The more I read into this and the more I hear about it, sounds like one of those movies that could be up for, a certain, I think, nominations. This does seem like one of those scripts. That being said, I don't want to jump the gun here. It does remain to be seen exactly how this film will play out. That being said, there seems to be a big budget here. Sony reportedly purchased the movie for around $20 million, and that's just the rights to the film. So that, it remains to be seen what their budget is for the production of this movie and what's going to get into that. But definitely, there has been a lot of news around, GME stock, the GameStop stock, and around this whole saga. So it'll be interesting to see that in film form, how they'll portray this, how they'll get it right, how they'll dramatize aspects of it. It'll be interesting. It seems, they're kind of doing an underdog story, it seems, from these kind of, I think, people who are investing in the stock, from their perspective rather than from Wall Street's perspective. So it's interesting, script there. We're going to see how this plays out. But again, I thought it was an interesting story. It's a very relevant, I think, video game saga. It's going to bring, some video game, I think, topics very much into the mainstream, depending on what they'll discuss within that movie, not just around the stock, but around GameStop and around the industry in general. It could be a pretty interesting, from that perspective. So again, there's not much else to say there. So I think we're going to move on to our next story here. We're almost closing up with the show here. This one's going to be pretty quick. And this was a PC release, actually. So bear with me as I switch gears here and pull that article up. Got about 2 articles left here. This one's a little bit more of just an update, and the next one's kind of a fun one because something real interesting. So as we can see here, let me move our marker down. We got another PlayStation PC release. So something we've been talking about a lot. PlayStation, excuse me, has been expanding into the live service market, into the PC market. We have Uncharted, the Legacy of Thieves collection, I believe they call that, which is Uncharted 4 and the Lost Legacy bundled together, coming to PC in less than a month, I believe. I believe that's October 19th, and I wrote that down here. October 19th, I had that written down. And then we also now get Spider-Man Miles Morales as well. So we had Spider-Man Remastered, the original game, come to PC just last month. Very cool to see that on PC with some extra features and ray tracing and kind of everything souped up to the max with all the graphics card settings, which is pretty cool to see. And we see the same thing here with Spider-Man Miles Morales. So this is coming on November 18th, and they released some system requirements, some of the graphics options, and some more, even a little bit of a trailer like they did with the last game, highlighting some of those features. Excuse me, that just blasted into my headphones here, that audio. I'm not sure I don't think you guys can hear that at home, but I'm going to play this trailer if I get this full screen really briefly. Maybe not. They may not cooperate with me here. But there we go. So I kind of did a little zoom and it worked out. But so we get some kind of PC features here in this trailer. I will play in the background as I discuss it. But I want to take this as an opportunity to just kind of discuss generally what PlayStation is doing right now. They have a few games coming out on PC this fall, including Miles here, as we saw with the original Spider-Man game. They have Uncharted, as well as they already have Days Gone and other releases. I don't know why Days Gone is the only one I mentioned, because they have Horizon and some other few games. But I do think we're going to see games like Ghost of Tsushima, of course, Death Stranding is already there, but a lot of other PlayStation exclusive games. This is kind of the track here. You wait a year or two and then they release on PC. Sony recently said, we covered it last week in the show with that Herman Hulse interview, that is kind of generally the plan, about a year after release when it comes to these first party exclusive titles. And then when it comes to their live service games coming up and a lot of their multiplayer cross-platform games they're promoting, that's going to be on all platforms, at least PC and PlayStation, for what we know now. And it'll be interesting to see exactly how this continues to go here with their PC approach, with their live service approach. But speaking of Spider-Man, I know I covered a lot of the show because I am a bit biased here. I am a fan, but I'm dying to see what's coming from that new game and what's coming from, Sony's 2023, if you will. Of course, they have God of War Ragnarok on the horizon. I didn't make it a full story because I didn't think it was really worth a full article and docket thing here. But Sony did announce a new PS5 bundle with God of War Ragnarok that's going to come out in November in next month. So, just kind of keeping it in line with the PS5 becoming more and more in stock. I think we briefly mentioned it last week as well, how they're targeting hundreds of millions of units next year. They're really, I mean, that's an exaggeration, $100 million in profit rather, but I want to say dozens, at least a million. I think 40 million units was their target. So they're very much looking to ramp up insane amount of PS5 production next year, and it's in pace to outpace pretty much the PlayStation 2 and the 4 in terms of being, a monumentally selling console. The only limitation here is literally just the chip shortages, and they just can't make these things fast enough. It's really not the demand that's the problem. It's really just the availability. And as we've seen, they're getting more and more available. You're starting to find them, a couple of them here and there at Best Buys and Targets. You're seeing the PlayStation Direct website update more regularly. I believe there was a period last week or so where they were up for several days where you could just order one and there was no worry of them, selling out of stock in 10 minutes like they usually do. So the light at the end of the tunnel is there. They're getting more and more accessible. We've seen that with Xbox. They've been really more available as well, just because unfortunately demand is not exactly the same while still being a decently high demand. I don't think the PS5 demand is really astronomical right now. So hopefully that can get to a steady pace and we see some more, announcements next year. There has been a lot of rumors, of course, with a lot of 2023 releases. We're really excited to see what comes next. But again, I digress. There's not much else to talk about in terms of what's happening with those PC releases. But we're excited as always, for the end of the year releases. Nothing crazy, I would say, happening this end of the year. Of course, we have God of War from PlayStation. We don't have anything on the Xbox side really, and this was really where Redfall and Starfield and a few other things, and the fall update for Halo that was supposed to happen were supposed to kind of shine, and unfortunately, all that got delayed to 2023. So not the hottest fall for Xbox, and PC is getting some good PlayStation ports here and some good. There's some interesting releases in general, so I don't want to say that we're not getting anything this fall in terms of cross-platform. Of course, there's some interesting releases, but in terms of exclusive games, again, we're getting some good PC releases here, but really 2023 is where we're looking at for the new exciting stuff. Spring 2023 is going to be jam-packed with a lot, so looking forward to that. And we got some December releases. We talked about Dead Space and our Callisto Protocol as well, and what's going on there with our January, December kind of battle. But again, I digress because we're at the end of the show here. About I do want to say one, get to this one last story before I kind of get into where I kind of delve into here. What's on the horizon as I usually do. But that's really it. So we're gonna move on to that next story. As I said, this one, as I said before, is kind of a fun one. Maybe not fun, depending on how you look at it. Maybe more of a interesting, at least from the perspective of video game history here. So I will pull this up, and it's. I think some people may be rolling their eyes when I say history because it's so recent. But then again, it's crazy to see in how such a short time how far video games can come. We're still, as much as we talk about VR and the future of video games in general, not just for VR, but just console gaming in general. We really, when I look at this from a kind of film perspective, as someone who loves music, film, and other mediums as well, we kind of are in a little bit of an infancy when it comes to video games. And I'm looking at my comments here. I see a comment from Fadi. How's it going, Fadi? Good to see you on the stream. But I'm just discussing kind of movies and video games right now because I think that when we look back at the silent film era movies in the early 20th century, when films were in their infancy and were very much a new concept, some people were very much fascinated and in awe by this new medium. Others thought it was kind of, juvenile or not worth, while it was cool, it was maybe, a little frightening or unusual or nothing that was worth being preserved or respected in the way that theater and opera and literature maybe were, at the time. So it took a long time for film to become, just in terms of respect, think about all the silent films and all the things that were just thrown away or burnt or destroyed because of the lack of preservation. That's more of a separate discussion in terms of game preservation and stuff, which kind of gets into this here. But basically, my point there is that it took a very long time for them to get out of that infancy, of the media, and to get more respect and kind of that auteur filmmaker, respect that Hollywood now I think has. And maybe has lost in some extent. We see some recent comments from people like Martin Scorsese and other famous filmmakers that kind of criticize, Hollywood's obsession with, the giant box office numbers and the commercialization, the kind of the commercial death of a lot of these auteur type films that don't really get made without a lot of, reliable profit margins and the likes. I know I get a lot of tangents here. I think a lot of this is interesting, but I do think that in terms of, and again, I'll pull this up as we get into it. In terms of the relation here to this story, our story here is that 2 unreleased NES titles are up for auction. And what's interesting about these, they're not just unreleased in terms of physical releases or demos. These are games that maybe weren't even shown before outside of a commercial or kind of promotional aspect. So the reason I got that whole tangent on films is because we see a lot of, especially in the older days of film, that back in the day things weren't as respected, weren't as considered in terms of how do we preserve this for history's sake. So we see here again, I'm not applying that NAS is at the forefront of the video game industry or anything like that. I'm just saying that it's something that's still a concern today because I think we're still in that infancy, even in 2022, where especially with digital gaming, where we don't really have any plans here in terms of long-term preservation of certain titles. As we think about all these services going offline in the future, we do lose a lot of video game history. So again, this is more something that is kind of a silver lining here with when it comes to physical gaming, that even though these games were long lost, they were found in a physical format and now are being sold for the first time. So getting more into what these games actually were, here are the two screenshots. We had one cartridge and one basically just a demo kind of pre-cartridge build here. So these are two, as we see from the tweet, currently unreleased, one of a kind, never digitized games for the original NES on eBay, which has literally never happened before, as they say. So one of these games was actually the Battlegrounds in Napoleon, which was a strategy game that was ready to ship to Nintendo, but never saw the light of day. So it never actually was shipped or digitized by Nintendo, was never put on cartridges. So we just have one, kind of chip here that has the game files that were going to be sent to Nintendo for printing onto cartridges, but never were. But this is the source file, basically. So meaning they're saying here digital versions can likely be recreated from this source file and then redistributed to kind of bring this long lost, never produced game into production, which is a really cool idea. That being said, the second game is actually kind of, to me, it's kind of more interesting just because I find the Power Glove a very interesting piece of technology. If you don't know the Power Glove, it was a very short-lived kind of, I would say prototype because it was meant to be marketed, but very short-lived product. A Power Glove, literally a glove for your hand that was developed by Rare. It was a motion controller that was famously in the film The Wizard. The glove was a massive flop commercially, as the article says, and there was only one game that was specifically released for the Power Glove. That being said, at the time, apparently there was some sort of demo game that was being brought around with the Power Glove to conventions and to some other professional, demo, locations where they were showing off the Power Glove to potential customers and professionals. So this demo game, which was said to be a prototype that Rare would show to retailers to gauge interest in a full, game title with the Power Glove, was never actually produced, was never in the same way, was never printed, but is on one of these unreleased cartridges here. It is a CES sample from the old CES conferences. So really cool to see that these are both on eBay. Again, I'm not sure who's going to be purchasing these at eBay. We'll have to wait to see the end of the auction. If it's just a private, buyer, or if it's someone who's meaning to preserve these or distribute these online, we'll have to wait and see. But I thought it was a cool, just a way to end the show here on a story that, seeing some games being preserved for history's sake, pretty cool to see there. Again, not much else to say on that, but I do think it was something that was worth mentioning. And just something that I thought was really cool. I love the idea. I mean, I'm just a history person in general. I almost feel kind of goofy saying history when it's something that wasn't that long ago. But I do think that, as I said here, we're still in the very early days of gaming in the large scheme of things. I think gaming and video games in general continue to evolve beyond what we even think of them today. And by the time, I am looking back at my childhood gaming, I think years and years down the line, decades from now, I think it'll be kind of funny to see how far we came even from now to then. I think that we're just exponentially moving here. So again, I don't want to imply that the NES is so far off in the past that it's some ancient history or anything, but I do bring up history because I think game history and preservation and something that's something we should think about now, and starting 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and continuing to now, something that has to be an active consideration for future generations. I think preserving, just like we preserve literature and books and classic films and things like that, I do think video games are just as important, and arguably I think will be even more impactful in terms of the form of the medium. And that's something I'm really passionate about. Obviously, I work in video games. I love video games. Of course, I am passionate about that in general. So it's something that I always like to bring up when this kind of conversation comes up, especially history and preservation. But that about brings me to the end of my thoughts there, the end of my tangent. Again, I know I said at the end of the show here, I may delve into some of what's next this fall, as I usually do, and kind of wrap up that way. But I do think I kind of said most of what I wanted to say today. I think that's a good spot to end it in. So as I say that, I will bring our docket down, and I think we are going to close out in a moment. So as I do that, as I close out here, I want to, as always, thank you all for joining me. Thanks for the shout outs here in the chat. I appreciate you tuning in, guys. And as I said, I will put this up later. This will upload right after the stream ends live, but it doesn't upload fully like right after. It takes about a day or two to process. So what I usually do is I edit that, I snip off that, beginning and end, and I get you those timestamps in there as fast as I can once YouTube allows me to get that edited in. So as soon as YouTube processes the video, you'll see that with timestamps. You can go article by article and keep up. If you just want to see one story you're interested in or whatever it is, you can go to exactly where you want to with those checkpoints, which is very helpful, I think. So I'll see you then if you're watching on the recording. I mean, you may have already watched, but if not, I will see you next week on the next live episode. It'll be episode 30. So that's kind of a milestone there, 30 episodes in this report, but we will see you next Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, as always. But that is it, guys. So thank you again so much, and I will talk to you soon. All right. Thanks for watching.